The sound of crackling flames jolted me awake. At first, I thought it was just a dream, perhaps a campfire or a summer barbecue. But as the thick, acrid smoke filled my bedroom through the window, reality set in. My heart raced, and my chest tightened as I threw off the sheets and rushed to the window. What I saw sent chills down my spine. My motorcycle, my state-issued police motorcycle, was completely engulfed in flames right in my driveway. The fire danced along its frame, licking the pavement like a hellish bonfire. My instincts kicked in, and I thought to grab the fire extinguisher. Yet even as I stumbled toward the door, I knew it was too late. The flames were already too high, and the damage had been done. The heat smacked against my face the moment I stepped outside, my bare feet making contact with the cool concrete. My heart hammered in my ears as I gazed at the smoldering wreckage. Ashen shock gave way to a slow-burn rage. That was when I heard laughter. I turned my head toward the house across the street, where a small group of people stood in the shadows of a perfectly manicured lawn, wine glasses in hand, clinking together as if celebrating. My jaw tightened as recognition hit me. It was the HOA board. Mrs. Pennington, their smug president, was at the center, whispering to the others before flashing a self-satisfied grin at me. "Next time, follow the rules, Mr. Dawson," she called, her voice dripping with condescension. For a moment, I was frozen, not out of fear or shock, but in disbelief at how far these lunatics had gone. I had encountered criminals, reckless drivers, and the occasional back-alley nut, but never had I seen suburban homeowners commit such a blatant felony over something so trivial. Just 2 days prior, these same people had knocked on my door with a friendly welcome letter, though I saw it as veiled threat from the Homeowners Association, which I had come to see as the neighborhood mafia. They had made it clear that joining was highly encouraged, all while speaking in that rehearsed, phony friendly tone that made my skin crawl. They aimed to exert control over my property, my house, and where I parked my own vehicle. After I politely declined, thinking little of it, the fines began rolling in. First, a notice for my grass being a half-inch too long. Then another claiming my police motorcycle was a non-compliant vehicle that needed to be stored out of sight. A $500 fine. I had laughed at that one, tossed it in the trash where it belonged, indignant that I didn't belong to their ridiculous club and that they had no authority over me. Apparently, they had taken my defiance poorly. The fire department arrived within minutes, and my driveway transformed into chaos. Flashing lights and firefighters battling the flames. The acrid scent of burnt rubber and scorched metal filled the air as I stood there, arms crossed, watching in silence. My bike, the machine I used to chase down criminals, respond to emergencies, and serve my community, was reduced to twisted, blackened scrap. One of the firefighters, a guy I knew from town, approached and let out a low whistle. "Damn, Jack. What the hell happened?" I exhaled slowly, rubbing my neck. "What happened?" I replied, but his brows shot up. "You serious?" I didn't need to answer. I was tense enough that my jaw felt like it might shatter from clenching. I knew full well who was responsible. My security cameras captured every second of it. Hours passed, and once the fire was extinguished and only wreckage remained, I sat in my living room, reviewing the footage. My fingers tapped restlessly against the table as I watched the grainy black and white video unfold. The HOA board, yes, the entire board, had crept onto my property in the dead of night. I watched as a balding guy in a sweater vest poured gasoline over my bike like a psychopath. Another figure, a woman I recognized as Mrs. Pennington's right hand, lit the match. My eye twitched. There it was, video evidence of them setting fire to a police vehicle. Not merely any vehicle, but a state-owned law enforcement motorcycle. A felony. A serious felony. And the best part, they had no idea who I really was. Sure, they knew I was a cop. They might have thought I was a low-level officer with a beat patrol and a sour attitude. What they didn't know was I was a state trooper with jurisdiction that spanned beyond their petty suburban fiefdom. They had just committed a federal crime right under the nose of someone who could bring their world crashing down. A slow smile formed on my face as I leaned back in my chair. They had really messed up this time. The next morning, the sun painted the sky in soft hues of orange and blue as I stood outside, arms crossed, observing the HOA board gather for their daily gossip near the community garden. Mrs. Pennington, impeccably dressed in her pearl necklace and power suit, as if she were running for office, shot me a triumphant stare. "Such a shame about your motorcycle," she called, fake sympathy saturating every word. "Perhaps next time you'll reconsider our community guidelines." I smiled a slow, deliberate grin, filled with the confidence of my impending reckoning. "Oh, I definitely will," I replied, my tone light and almost playful. "In fact, I'd love to discuss it with all of you, maybe even over at the station." Her eyes widened. "The station?" I produced my badge, flipping it open so that the sunlight glinted off of it. The change in her expression was instantaneous. Her smile faded and the color drained from her face so fast. I thought she might faint right on the sidewalk. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, their previous confidence evaporating like mist in the sun. "Yeah," I continued, relishing how her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. "Considering that you and your little gang committed arson against state property, I think we ought to have a proper chat about it, maybe with a few of my colleagues. You know, the ones who handle felonies." Mrs. Pennington took a step back, then another, while the other HOA members looked like deer caught in headlights. I let out a slow chuckle. "See you soon, folks." With that, I turned and walked back into my house, leaving them to stew in their impending doom. Oh, this was going to be entertaining. It was apparent that the HOA members were in a state of panic as they huddled together outside Mrs. Pennington's house, whispering anxiously. Some cast wary glances at my home, their expressions a blend of dread and confusion. I watched from my porch, sipping my morning coffee, enjoying the sight of their world unraveling. The very people who had smirked and laughed while igniting my motorcycle now resembled terrified rats on a sinking ship. And the best part, they still had no clue just how deep they were in trouble. I spent the entire night combing through the security footage, making copies, and preparing my next move. It wasn't solely about revenge, though let's be honest. That was pretty sweet. It was about justice, ensuring these power-hungry, self-important busybodies learned they weren't above the law. They had played their suburban mafia game for far too long, terrorizing homeowners with their ridiculous rules and ludicrous fines, thinking nobody would dare stand up to them. They had finally messed with the wrong guy. By mid-morning, I received a call from the station. My buddy, Officer Martinez, had already seen the footage. His reaction was priceless. He laughed for an entire minute before exclaiming, "You mean to tell me a bunch of soccer moms and retirees committed first-degree arson on a state trooper's bike? Oh man, this is going to be fun." He promised to handle the paperwork while I got ready for the next step. The HOA meeting was set for noon, and I didn't want to miss it. So, after a quick breakfast, I dressed in my casual off-duty clothes, grabbed my badge, and headed down the street. The meeting was being held at the community clubhouse, the same place where they probably celebrated my misfortune the night prior. As I walked through the doors, an unsettling silence filled the room. Each of the HOA board members was seated at their long, polished table, staring at me as though a ghost had entered. Mrs. Pennington occupied the center seat, her expression carefully neutral, but the tight grip she had on her pen betrayed her nerves. The other members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze, suddenly much less assured than they'd been while setting fire to my property. "Mr. Dawson," Mrs. Pennington finally said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" I took my time approaching the table, letting the silence linger between us. Then, I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and turned it around for them to see the footage in full clarity. The gasoline, the match, the laughter, the flames. Color drained from Mrs. Pennington's face as someone in the back let out a small, strangled gasp. "I think we need to have a little chat," I said, my voice calm, almost amused. The response was instantaneous. The man in the sweater vest, the same one who had been overzealous with the gasoline, leaped to his feet. "This is outrageous," he sputtered. "You can't," I interrupted him, my voice dropping to a tone I usually reserve for criminals. "Sit." He Saturday. Mrs. Pennington took a shaky breath. "Mr. Dawson, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for this. Oh, I'm sure there is, I said, crossing my arms. I'd love to hear it. Perhaps you can explain why a group of homeowners decided to commit felony arson over a parking dispute. Not a word was spoken. I let the silence drag on before continuing. Here's what's going to happen. In about an hour, officers will be arriving at your homes with arrest warrants. You see, unlike you, I don't just make up rules and hand out fines for existing. I enforce real laws. And setting fire to a police vehicle? That's a serious crime. So congratulations. You all just turned your little HOA into a criminal organization. Panic filled the room. One woman clutched her pearls as if about to faint. Another man appeared to be sweating profusely, as if he had run a marathon. But Mrs. Pennington was still clinging to control. This is ridiculous, she protested, though her voice lacked the usual confidence. This is all a misunderstanding. I smirked. Right. A misunderstanding. You accidentally poured gasoline on my bike? You accidentally lit the match. She licked her lips, searching for a rebuttal. You're blowing this out of proportion. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make the hairs on her neck bristle. Tell you what, why don't you call my captain and explain to him why you thought it was a good idea to burn a state-owned motorcycle? Maybe he'll understand your side of things. Maybe he won't press for the maximum sentence. Her composure cracked, her eyes darting around the room for support, which was absent. The other HOA members shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing Mrs. Pennington had led them right into disaster. Then the doors swung open, and two uniformed officers walked in, with Martinez leading the way, looking far too amused by the entire situation. Good afternoon, folks, he cheerfully announced. I've got some paperwork here with your names on it. Absolute chaos erupted. Some members attempted to protest, but they were quickly silenced by the sight of handcuffs being pulled from belts. The woman who had been clutching her pearls fainted, slumping dramatically against her chair. One man attempted to flee, only to be intercepted by another officer at the door. It was a full-blown meltdown. Mrs. Pennington stood up, her face livid with rage. This is harassment, she screeched. We are upstanding members of this community. You can't do this. Martinez just grinned. You burned a cop's bike, and we can absolutely do this. One by one, the HOA members were handcuffed and escorted out. Some cried, some screamed, others begged for leniency, but none was granted. As I observed them being led to the squad cars, I couldn't help but shake my head. These people had spent years lording over others, believing they were untouchable. They had bullied homeowners, fined them for absurd reasons, and acted as if they were above the law. But now, they were merely criminals. Martinez clapped a hand on my shoulder. You know, he chuckled. I've seen a lot of stupid criminals in my time, but this takes the cake. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in days. Yeah, I said, watching Mrs. Pennington being shoved into the back of a squad car, still screaming about how this was unjust. It really does. As the last of the HOA members were driven away, I took a deep breath in, inhaling a sweet scent of justice. The neighborhood was finally free. And damn, did it feel good. It was quieter than it had been in years. Without the HOA constantly hovering over every minutiae, life began to feel normal again. Homeowners mowed their lawns without fear of fines, parked in their driveways without citations, and most importantly, no one was burning down state property in the middle of the night. The absurd reign of the HOA was finally over, and it was about time. The subsequent court case was nothing short of a spectacle. The entire town learned of the incident, and everyone was eager to see how it would unfold. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing, and I fought the urge to laugh as I watched Mrs. Pennington march in, dressed in her finest clothes, as if attending a gala rather than facing a criminal trial. She carried herself with the same smug attitude, convinced she was above the law. The other HOA members, however, appeared aged a decade overnight, their expressions pale and filled with regret. The prosecution didn't hold back. The security footage was played in front of the packed courtroom. Every moment was crystal clear, the gasoline being poured, the match being lit, their little celebration afterward. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even the judge had to pause for a moment in disbelief. Mrs. Pennington tried to argue it was all just a misunderstanding, claiming they were merely enforcing community standards, and my refusal to comply left them no choice. When that failed, she attempted to play the victim, asserting they had been intimidated by me and that the fire was an accident. The judge wasn't buying it. "You expect me to believe," he said, rubbing his temples, "that 6 grown adults accidentally poured gasoline onto a police motorcycle, accidentally lit a match, and then accidentally stood around laughing while it burned?" Mrs. Pennington stammered, her carefully rehearsed words failing her. The judge didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the jury, who didn't need long to deliberate. The verdict came back swiftly: guilty. Every single one of them. Sentencing day was even better. Some received probation, hefty fines, and community service, while a few, including Mrs. Pennington and her closest allies, were handed actual jail time. She had been so certain she could talk her way out of it. But the moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, reality struck hard. The woman who had ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist was now just another criminal being led out of the courtroom. The fallout from the case was monumental. The HOA effectively disbanded overnight, with most of its board members behind bars or too ashamed to show their faces in public. There was no one left to keep it going. The community held a vote and, in record time, the HOA was officially dissolved. People celebrated as if it were a national holiday, and someone even set off fireworks in their backyard, something that would have earned them a fine just a week earlier. The best part? The funds that had once been used to enforce the HOA's absurd rules were now directed towards something much more beneficial. After discussions within the neighborhood, we decided to transform the old HOA office into something useful, a community park. But not merely any park. It would be a barbecue and gathering spot. A location where people could enjoy their own property without being harassed over fence heights or the colors of their front doors. I made sure to personally oversee the demolition of the HOA office. And watching that building come down was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Gone were the endless stacks of fines, patronizing newsletters, and nonsensical regulations about mailbox styles. In their place, picnic tables, a grill station, and a massive sign that read HOA Free Zone. The irony was not lost on me. The land that had once been used to control people was now being repurposed to unite them. The first community barbecue was a resounding success. Families who had been at odds for years over petty HOA disputes came together, laughing, eating, and relishing the freedom they had fought for. Even some police officers who had assisted with the arrests, including Martinez, showed up. He took one look at the banner I had hung over the grill station and burst out laughing. "You really named this the anti-HOA cookout," he said, shaking his head as he grabbed a plate of food. "Damn right I did," I replied, flipping a burger. "Gotta ensure no one ever forgets what happened here." People began sharing their horror stories about the HOA, trading tales of absurd fines and power-crazed board members. One guy recounted how he'd been fined for having an improperly shaped flower bed. Another shared how he received a citation because his trash can was visible for exactly 3 minutes past the HOA's strict pickup window. The more stories I heard, the more I realized how much everyone had suffered under their ridiculous rules. But now they were free. As the sun began to set, I leaned back in my chair, observing the community come together in a way it never had before. Kids were playing, neighbors were conversing, and for the first time since moving here, I truly felt a sense of belonging. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a new face, a man in his 40s wandering around the park, surveying the setup with interest. He eventually approached me, extending a hand. "Nice place you have here," he said. "I just moved into the neighborhood." "Name's Greg," he added. "Jack," I replied, shaking his hand. He gestured toward the banner. "So, what happened to the old HOA?" I chuckled, glancing around at the happy, relaxed crowd. "They had a little accident with fire." Greg laughed, clearly thinking I was joking. "Well, it sounds like this place is better off without them. Hey, speaking of which, have you guys thought about starting a new HOA? You know, one that's a little more reasonable." I set my drink down and turned to look him dead in the eye. Grinning. Greg. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. The panic on his face was priceless. He held up his hands, laughing nervously. Kidding. Totally kidding. I handed him a plate of barbecue. Good. Now eat before I start writing fines. The night ended with fireworks, laughter, and an overwhelming sense of peace that had been absent for far too long. I had moved into this neighborhood seeking quiet, but I discovered something so much better, a community worth fighting for. In the end, that was infinitely better than any fine free lawn or perfectly measured flower bed. As I leaned back and took a deep breath, one thought resonated within me. I had won. And damn, did victory taste sweet.